On December 14th, 2020, the very first vaccine dose was administered here in Toronto, and we began, as a city, the unprecedented task, and a task of unprecedented scale, of trying to vaccinate millions of Torontonians, something never before done on this scale. Just over 100 days ago, June 15th to be exact, we announced that we had 20% of our eligible population fully vaccinated. Just over 3 months later, we are now at more than 80% of eligible Torontonians fully vaccinated. We know it's going to take time and effort to get to 85% and then on to 90%, but we are already on our way. As anyone who's ever run a marathon or a business campaign or an election will tell you, it's the last miles that are always the longest ones. Every day, as a result of that challenge put in front of us, there are dozens of Team Toronto clinics happening across the city where people are continuing to get their first doses, their second doses, and now even some COVID-19 vaccine boosters for eligible residents. And on top of that quiet and steady effort, we launched the Days of Action and the Shop and Vax clinics to help continue our success in getting people vaccinated. I want to thank the media for covering these events so that people know about them and can take part. It's important, and I'm confident that it makes a difference in the turnout at these vaccination clinics. These efforts are going to continue as we work non-stop to help people have access to the vaccines. I'm proud to announce today that this Saturday we will be holding Vax 25. This is a one-day citywide vaccination push in all 25 wards, with approximately 35 clinics in data-driven locations where we are working to increase vaccination rates. Along with our community ambassadors and organizations, we are working with every member of City Council to help promote these locations in each of their wards. The clinics include malls, they include health centres, pharmacies, community hubs, hospitals, and college campuses. And the entire point of Vax 25 is to give people in every single ward in the city and every part of our city an opportunity to get vaccinated this Saturday. If you need your first dose or your second dose, there are 35 clinics across Toronto at the ready trying to help you to do the right thing. The vaccine is safe and it represents the best protection we have against COVID-19. It won't just protect you, it will help your loved ones, your co-workers, and many other people at the same time, our collective health. Please make no mistake. While COVID numbers have stabilized for now, they are not at zero. And our best experts have told us there is still a risk, especially as the colder weather arrives and more people spend more time indoors and in group settings. While some are inclined to be critical or of projections which still suggest extreme caution in our behavior, the record reflects that throughout the pandemic, these projections have been directionally right far more often than wrong during the course of the pandemic. If we want schools and businesses and restaurants and entertainment venues to stay open, which I believe we all do, whatever it is we have to do then, getting that vaccination number up and respecting public health guidelines must be our course of action. That is true for me, that is true for all of us. These continue to be priority one, respecting public health guidelines on a continuing basis and getting the vaccine numbers up. We have seen what can happen if we allow ourselves to be taken off this course. The province's proof of immunization system, which is now in place, is needed if you want to dine in at a restaurant or work out at a gym